Hello there. So today there's no wind, which is absolutely extraordinary. I'm just showing you where I'm living at the moment, and because there's no wind I'm going to take another stroll up here. I love training people to be shamans, so the friend of mine who I'm training at the moment, it's great the interactions between us and the way learning is stimulated and new ways of looking at things, so I particularly wanted to share this with you. So as part of the training I invite her to watch The Matrix, which if you haven't seen it is, I would say, the most powerful film that was released in the year of 1999. So such an old film, 21 years ago, and yet still so relevant. If you haven't ever watched The Matrix, give it a go, see how you experience it. And so it brings up a lot, and one of the things she was saying is that she was aware when she lived in a foreign country how the people of that country were very keen on everyone in that society complying and obeying the unwritten rules. There are certain ways to be, certain ways to behave, and anyone who steps out of line tends to have the wrath of the majority descend upon them. And so really this film is all about coercion and compliance, because this is very much what we're all dealing with at the moment as a species. And it made me realise various different things in my life, so memories have come up about this, so I'm going to talk a little bit about them. So I was a member of a community, I call it a part-time community, because we used to get together every summer and spend up to 2.5 months, and we would turn empty fields into a tented eco-village conference centre with all sorts of things there. It's actually called greenandaway.org. Like so many organisations this year, they have been forced to close their doors, so they have not done any events at all. And what I want to focus on is everyone was volunteers, nobody got paid. One guy came up with the original idea and persuaded or enrolled others in his idea, and it became a reality, and I did that for 17 years. And I can remember a particular point when one of the original people who joined and made it what it was targeted by the person who had the vision for this organisation. He decided that everything would be so much better if the group was to get rid of this person, so he initiated a campaign of lobbying, persuasion, quiet conversations in dark corners, and I watched all this happen with increasing alarm, and eventually he got his way. This person was indeed expelled from the group. So this really does illustrate a very significant point about human beings. So I'm very grateful to my friend because she chose to write an article having watched The Matrix, and the point she was making is that this has been a tendency in human beings for a very long time. It certainly goes back to Greek and Roman times, and I argue it probably goes back as long as there's been human societies. And one of the ways that humans function, it seems, is they will create rules. Now some of these rules are like incredibly important and obvious. For example, don't kill your neighbour, really obvious one. In fact, I want to focus on this particular one. Don't set fire to your neighbour's house. I do know of an eco-village community in Wales where the whole ethos was to be as free as possible, have as few restrictions imposed upon people as could be possibly managed. And in fact, I can remember the woman who was a member of that organisation coming to the community where I was living at the time, and she explained it's very simple. People can do as they wish as long as they don't do, and she gave the example, don't set fire to another person's home. Well, for reasons which will probably only be known to that person who did it, one person did in fact set fire to the home of another person, and within an incredibly short space of time that person and all their possessions were removed from that community. And that's an example of coercion and compliance acting as a necessity for the protection of the people in that society. It's really quite straightforward, isn't it? But what I'm particularly curious about now is here we are living in a global society, and within countries and within municipalities and all the rest of it, and people have their different opinions about what's going on with the pandemic. Is it a pandemic? Is it a scamdemic? People have got all these different opinions. And what becomes really clear, the more you listen to people, is these opinions are polarising and becoming stronger. And so for some people, if a person was to walk around not wearing a mask, that is actually tantamount to putting the entire society at risk. And then if that person's actually gone and done their scientific research and looked at studies about the use of masks, they might well very simply easily conclude that actually wearing a mask is harming the individual and harming the society as a whole. So what do we do in these situations? I really am raising this as like, I don't have the answer, I'm just asking questions at this point, because I guess since the film I made yesterday, where I felt really quite opinionated, having done the research and then of course being a person who has actually studied and practiced as a microbiologist, and I know so much of what people are saying on the mainstream media about microbes and infection and disease simply aren't true, and that so many of the recommendations, which are becoming more than that but becoming mandatory demands on the society, all these things, so many of them actually don't make any common sense at all. And so it comes into this issue of people in a community obeying rules or choosing to rebel against those rules. And here's the important point: some of the rules are completely without value, without any merit. And I suppose one of the simplest examples of all really is that there are many societies in the world where if a person is to consume a particular dried plant substance, they could be exposed to legal sanctions. There are a very few places in the world where if a person was to be in possession of certain dried plant substances, they could be imprisoned and even executed. So I feel this is a great example of what we're facing as a human society, because we are in this massive awakening process. And so the old age, which is rapidly dwindling, is the age of Pisces, which has been the age of belief, where religions have very much dominated things. And I would argue that science was one of the last religions of the Piscean age, where again people take things on belief without bothering to examine the evidence for themselves. So that whole way of life, that whole attitude of doing what others tell you without bothering to examine the evidence of the facts, that's been a dominant way of life for over 2 millennia. And we're moving into a time which is the age of Aquarius, and an age to age of Pisces ending, age of Aquarius dawning. That takes at least 100 years. It's not something that happens quickly. So this being the case, that we are literally in a transition from a belief-based society to an evidence-based society. So the rebels, the ones that are saying, show me the evidence, I've done the research, have you done the research? People with those attitudes, which I will admit does seem to fit me rather well, they are hearing very much that Aquarian call of don't believe, don't trust blindly, find out for yourself and choose to act upon what you know rather than what others are saying. So the idea of blind obedience is very much Piscean, and I do what I know to be right is very much Aquarian. And there's a big aspect of the Aquarian mentality, which is to not believe, to not go into blind trust, but to consider everything, to weigh everything up and make your own decisions based upon what you know to be right rather than what you have been told by others. So I can see that we are all of us members of society where we are going through this transition, this awakening process from compliance into questioning, which can then lead to dissent, which can lead to people choosing to break away and do things in a completely different way. And that was what was so interesting for me when I did live in a full-time intentional based community. And there's a film called Middlewood, tells you a little bit of what my life is like there and all of our lives. Just blown away by these beautiful blue flowers now, wonderful. So living in that community, there came a point that myself and a bunch of other people, we were like the newcomers, and when we arrived there were just 3 adults and 1 child. That's all there actually were in the community before we all moved in. And there was something that happened that distressed me mightily, because one of the original 3, he liked to hold parties, and he held good parties, they were great. Some people in the community didn't like that and felt that should not be happening. Now these flowers are just so stunning, wonderful colours. So what ended up happening is one of the people that didn't like the parties started going around lobbying and talking to people behind the back of the one that liked to hold the parties, and gradually through his lobbying campaign persuaded people that it would be better if this guy was not part of the community. And eventually this is exactly what happened. He was expelled. So both in this part-time community I was involved with for 17 years and the full-time intentional community for 4 years, I watched the same tendency arise, this need to choose some particular individual quirk to judge as somehow being unacceptable, and then to go to a lot of trouble to persuade others, I'm right, he's wrong, get him out. So I find this is one of the most distressing aspects of being human, actually, the fact that it seems to be part of our nature. And I do tie it in very much with the old ways of being. And so I'm very interested to hear any opinions that you have on this subject, because it's something that has touched and moved me considerably. And if you wish to be more informed in what I do, you're most welcome to like and subscribe and touch the bell for notifications, all the rest of it. So I'm going to leave you with those thoughts and ask you this: how do you feel about compliance? How do you feel about people who refuse to comply, people who rebel? How do you feel about the majority forcing you to do something that you are actually physically uncomfortable with and may even be harming your health? How do you feel about these things? And how do you feel about the idea that someone could actually decide which dry plant material is okay for you to put in your body as a completely personal choice? I do find the entire subject fascinating. I'd love to hear your comments. Thank you very much indeed.